قسمی که می‌بینین تفاهم‌نامه ایجاد اکادمی افسران پوانتون نظامی افغانستان در حال امضا شدن است. گراند ژورنالیستان و در مطبوعات محترم و مسئولین و خبری کنفرانس پیلیجی
بسیار افتخار داریم که امروز جناب ماب دیوید کامرون صدر اعظم محترم دولت شاهی انگلستان با خود داریم. جناب ایشان از دوستهای بسیار قوی افغانستان هستند و یکی از پشتیبانای اصلی کشور ما هستند. اینها نه تنها در زمان صدارتشان از چندین سال به طرف بلکه پیش از او که رئیس حزب اپوزیسیون در انگلستان بودند به افغانستان سفر داشتند و شاید سفر یازدهمشان به افغانستان بوده باشد. همواره از دید وسیع و از دید یک دوست پشتیبان و با واقع بینی حالت افغانستان با افغانستان اینا در همکاری بودند. امروز قسمی که مشاهده کردین یکی از وعده های خود که با ما 2 سال پیش لطف نموده بودند به سر رساندند که او امضای توافقنامه تربیت افسرهای افغانستان در اکادمی نظامی افغانستان توسط افسرهای انگلستان است که به مثل اکادمی سندهرست انگلستان که یکی از بهترین مؤسسات نظامی جهان است، افسرها و جوانای اردوی ملی افغانستان تربیت میشن. این قدم مهم امروز ما نه تنها که به مردم افغانستان مبارکباد میگیم بلکه یک اقدام به طرف تقویت نیروهای افغانستان، به طرف مسلکی شدن هرچی بهتر نیروهای افغانستان و به طرف ایجاد یک اردوی ملی تعلیم یافته و مسلکی و مجهز می‌دانیم. از به نمایندگی از مردم افغانستان جلالت مآب صدر اعظم صاحب از تمام کمک هایی که انگلستان به افغانستان نموده و از همکاری استراتژیکی که ما و شما با هم امضا کردیم و از مساعدتی که شما در کنفرانس توکیو اعلان کردین ما تشکر میکنیم و از قربانی های جوانای انگلیس در افغانستان و از خدمات انگلستان در افغانستان تشکر کرده. مطمئن هستم که نتایجش بر افغانستان خوب خواهد بود که انشاءالله هست و امیدوار هستم که دردهایی را که شما داشتین اونها به ترتیب التیام شوند که از یک افغانستان مترقی و یک افغانستان به پا استاده شما شاهد باشین و از اقداماتتان نتیجه را که میخواهیم انشاءالله بگیریم. بسیار خوش آمدین باز به افغانستان. افتخار داریم از اینکه شما را در کشور خود مهمان خود داریم.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President, and it's very good to be back here in Kabul with you, a strong ally and a good friend, and it's been very good to have these discussions this morning. And as you say, it was here 2 years ago that we discussed the idea of establishing an officer training college in Kabul, part run by the British, and I'm very pleased that within 2 years we've been able to sign this memorandum, and I hope it'll be a lasting contribution from my country to the people of Afghanistan to help with the training and development of your officers and your army. So thank you very much for that, and thank you for the warm welcome. We met earlier this year. We met in Chicago in May. We've had good talks here today. And we do share the same vision for Afghanistan, a secure, stable, and democratic country that never again becomes a haven for international terror. And we are working together to achieve it. We're building up Afghan forces so they can protect your citizens and keep out violent extremists once the international forces leave. We are strengthening democracy and governance so that all Afghans can play their part in developing a more prosperous country. And we're working with regional partners because a stable Afghanistan is not just in the interests of Afghans, but in the interests of their neighbors too. And I look forward to the meeting we'll have later today with the Pakistan Prime Minister between us. A year ago, when I last visited Kabul, British troops were the lead force responsible for keeping people safe in the 3 districts of Helmand. Now it is Afghan forces leading operations against insurgents in Lashkargah and in Nadi Ali, and Nari Siraj will follow after Ramadan. In October, there will be 350,000 Afghan security forces. When I first came to Helmand in 2006, there were almost no security forces at all. This is huge progress, and as I saw in Helmand yesterday, these are capable forces. Nationwide, they're leading 40% of the conventional operations and carrying out 85% of the training. I believe we are on track for 2014, when international forces will withdraw from their combat role. And I think this is testament to the huge commitment and professionalism of British troops, their international partners, and the bravery and the dedication of the Afghan army too. As Afghan forces grow in capacity and capability, British forces are shifting into a training and mentoring role, and more of our troops will gradually return home. But while we'll no longer be fighting alongside Afghan forces, we will continue to support them. At the NATO summit, we agreed to commit £70 million, $100 million, as part of the $4 billion package to support and sustain the Afghan security forces long after 2014. And I think this is very important. We will also continue to train these forces, as we've just discussed, through the training academy. The President and I also talked about the political process that Afghanistan needs to build a stronger and more stable state, more representative and inclusive politics, and strong, well-governed institutions. I welcome the President's commitment to the elections in 2014 and to a peaceful and democratic succession after your second term. The Constitution and the leadership of the Afghan country are for the Afghan people to decide. But we both agree that these elections must be credible, inclusive, and nationwide. Britain stands ready to assist the Afghan government and the Independent Electoral Commission to help in any way we can to ensure this is achieved. And we've already committed to maintain our development assistance to Afghanistan at £178 million a year. Over the last 3 months in Chicago and Tokyo, the international community has made clear our commitment to securing Afghanistan's future and prosperity for decades to come. We want to work with you to transform the future together. And I think this sends a very clear message to the Taliban, that you cannot wait this out until foreign forces leave in 2014, because we will be firm friends and supporters of Afghanistan long beyond then. So now is the time for everyone to participate in a peaceful political process in Afghanistan. All those who renounce violence, who respect the Constitution, can choose to have a voice in the future prosperity of this country, rather than continuing in fighting to destroy it. Now, Afghanistan's neighbours have a vital role to play, and I look forward to those discussions we will have with Prime Minister Ashraf and President Karzai shortly. Afghanistan and Pakistan have a shared interest in a stable Afghanistan. It is vital not just for the future security of their citizens, but for their prosperity too. Britain is a strong partner of both countries, and I believe that both sides need to build trust and to work together to build that safe and secure future, and I look forward to those discussions we will have later today. Thank you once again for your welcome. It's very good to be back in your country, and I look forward to further meetings that I'm sure we'll be having in the months and the years to come.
An honour, Mr. Prime Minister. An honour, Mr. Prime Minister.
Chris Shipp from ITV.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you, Mr. President. In 2.5 years, as you just mentioned, British troops ends their combat role in this country, and yet it appears that the peace talks with the Taliban are not making any meaningful progress. How worried are you, Prime Minister, about that? And Mr. President, how committed are you personally to that process? And if I may, Prime Minister, on the Olympics, you said to me yesterday we shouldn't focus on the negative parts of London 2012, so I mean this question in the best possible way. How positive should we see the Border Force Union threat to strike during the Olympics? And Mr. President, of course you're most welcome. Will you come to London 2012?
First of all, on the issue of peace talks, I think we have to be clear, at one level, there are fighters leaving the battlefield who are giving up their weapons, giving up their fighting, and who want to be part of a successful future Afghanistan. So that is happening on the ground. What I would say to the question, indeed to the Taliban, is that be in no doubt that there is a very clear and strong plan to transfer lead security responsibility from very capable ISAF forces, including British forces, to very capable Afghan forces. And I'm content that they will be able to defeat an insurgency and that Afghanistan will have a secure future. Of course, we would make even further progress if there were successful political talks and if the insurgency was to come to an end in that way. But the Taliban should be in no doubt that we will be handing over to a very capable, very large, very well-equipped Afghan army, security forces, police forces, local police, and that plan is on track, is working well. Of course, there are huge challenges, and as I said yesterday, the security challenges in Afghanistan will not end in 2014, they will continue. But I'm convinced that we have the right plan for transition and that we can deliver on that plan. It would be improved by further political discussions, by better cooperation between Afghanistan and Pakistan. It would be improved by those things, but it is not dependent on those things. On the Olympics, I do hope people can be positive. I think it's going to be a great few weeks for Britain, a great few weeks for sport, and I think there's also going to be a fantastic legacy in terms of the future of Britain. I'm going to be very focused on making sure we win new investment, new jobs, new businesses coming to Britain, and there'll be a whole series of investor conferences all the way through the Olympic Games, and I'll be playing a part in those, because I think the question now is not just how do we have a great Games, but how do we make the most out of the Games. In terms of the ballot that took place yesterday, my understanding is that it was around a 20% turnout and a very narrow majority. So I hope that strike action won't take place. I do not believe it would be right. I do not believe it would be justified. I think what we see at our borders right now is actually with the extra investment that's put in, the contingency plans that were made, that Heathrow seems to be working and working well. So I'm confident that we'll deliver all the things necessary for a safe, secure and successful Games. I said to President Karzai he'd be very welcome. I know he's done a huge amount of international travel in recent months because we've had Chicago, we've had Tokyo, very important international gatherings, but he's always welcome in London and indeed the rest of the United Kingdom. He has a particular love for some of the rural parts and he's always very welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Sir, the peace process is the most important of our pursuits for Afghanistan. It remains the highest priority. And that's why we have today here with us, in our meeting with Prime Minister Cameron, the chairman of the High Peace Council of Afghanistan, Mr. Salahuddin Rabbani. Today, there will be a meeting shortly after this press conference between the Honourable Prime Minister and Mr. Rabbani to focus on British contribution to the peace process. And as the Prime Minister indicated in his remarks, very shortly after, we will have a tripartite with the Prime Minister of Pakistan, which is the first of its kind to be held between the three countries, for which, again, I thank Prime Minister Cameron for his contribution and his recommendations and initiatives in this regard. So yes, sir, it is the highest priority and one that the Afghan people are focused on extremely heavily. On the Olympics and my participation in London, I'll be pleased and definitely honored to be there. And if there is still room available, I will definitely be there. I heard from the Prime Minister that there are over 100 leaders from all over the world, presidents and prime ministers coming. So if there is still a place around the countryside, I'll be pleased to be there. I'll think about it, and surely my inclination is to be there as a friend and as a partner, and also in the spirit of sportsmanship.
شکیلا ابراهیم خیل هستم از تلویزیون طلوع. نخست آقای نخست وزیر با هیئت همراهیشان خوش آمدید میگم به افغانستان. پرسش نخستم از آقای نخست وزیر است اینا که نقش کشورهای همسایه را در تامین صلح و ثبات در افغانستان اثرگذار دانستند و نشستی دارن با نخست وزیر پاکستان و نفوذ و روابط سنتی که با پاکستان دارن. خواست عمده از اینا از پاکستان چه خواهد بود که چه نقشی را در روند گفتگوهای صلح افغانستان بازی بکنه و همچنان تهدیدی است از مرزهای افغانستان، از آن سوی مرزهای افغانستان که حراسافیانان از پاکستان داخل افغانستان میشن. خواست از اینا چه خواهد بود در این رابطه؟ و تشکر. سوالم از شما است که شما از بریتانیا چه خواست دارین در این نشست سه جانبه؟ اینا که روابط سنتی دارن با پاکستان، از نفوذ زیادی در پاکستان برخوردار هستند، چه نقشی بازی کنند در روند گفتگوهای صلح و همچنان در مبارزه صادقانه پاکستان در برابر تروریسم، کاری که تا به حال پاکستان را انجام نداده است. و یک سوال دیگه از شما دارم که شما یکی از تعهداتتان آوردن اصلاحات در حکومت افغانستان بود که آیا این اصلاحات از کابینه افغانستان گفته میشه که شما آغاز میکنین و گزارش‌های وجود داره که یکی از وزیرای کابینه که وزیر مالی افغانستان است در اواخر تازگی استعفا داده، چقدر این را تایید میکنین؟ تشکر.
وزیر مالیه استعفا داده؟
گزارش‌ها وجود داره، گفتم تایید میکنین یا نه؟ تشکر.
Thank you. Well, I would just make this very clear point, which I've made to the President of Afghanistan and I'd make to the Pakistan Prime Minister. The terrorists that are trying to wreck Afghanistan are by and large the same terrorists that are trying to wreck Pakistan. This is one fight that we all need to be engaged in to save Afghanistan from Talibanization and from Taliban and terrorism. And we need to do the same to help Pakistan, which is threatened by a very similar terrorist threat. So we should be together in one single fight, working as closely together, because it's in all our interests to have a stable, peaceful, prosperous, democratic Afghanistan and to have a stable, peaceful, prosperous, democratic Pakistan. Why is Britain so involved in this? Well, we have long-term relations with both countries stretching back many, many years. We have huge ties with both countries. There are over 1 million people of Pakistani origin living in Britain. But also we face a security threat. When I first started coming to Afghanistan 6 years ago, over 3/4 of the terrorist plots that were threatening people in my country were coming from the Afghanistan-Pakistan area. Because of the work of ISAF, the work of President Karzai, the work the Pakistanis have done within their own country, the work of the Americans, that threat has, instead of 3/4 of the threats, it is now less than half. So we are making progress, and this is our fight, as well as your fight, as well as the Pakistanis' fight. And we need to secure both countries against this terrorist threat. And as I say, it is not a terrorist threat that threatens one at the benefit of the other. It is a terrorist threat that threatens both. And that is, I think, the very clear background to the discussions that we will have. And Britain will do everything it can to try and encourage the strong joint working between Afghans and Pakistanis to face up to this threat together. It's in all our interests that we do so, and that we do so rapidly, as we have this vital period in Afghan history, as you take full control of the security of your country over these next 2 years.
در مورد مذاکرات امروز بین افغانستان و انگلستان و پاکستان، ابتکار این مذاکرات از جناب صدر اعظم انگلستان بوده، جناب آقای کامرون بوده و قبل از یام نشست های در حاشیه کنفرانس های دیگه بین ما و انگلستان و پاکستان بوده، البته نه به سطح رؤسای حکومت های کشورها. این بار اول است که نشست میشه. طبیعی است که هدف نشست است که چطور راههای مؤثرتر برای مبارزه علیه تروریسم پیدا کنیم و چطور نقش پاکستان در بهبود اوضاع منطقه و پروسه صلح افغانستان سریعتر داشته باشیم. در مجلس امروز در فضای دوستی و بسیار صمیمیت مطمئنم که این مسائل صحبت میشن و امیدوار هستیم که با آرزویی که همه ما داریم پاکستان و افغانستان و انگلستان به صورت هرچی بیشتر برسیم. در مورد اصلاحات در حکومت در تمام ساحات حکومت داری قسمی که در کنفرانس قبلی عرض کردم ترتیبی گرفته شده به اساس سخنایم در شورای ملی افغانستان و در کابینه قبلی دو مورد به تفصیل صحبت شد و تصامیمی گرفته شد. او تصامیم تا یک فرمانی و ضمیمه‌های فرمان در حال ترتیب شدن است. امیدوار هستیم که روز شنبه یک شنبه به امضای حاضر باشه. در مورد آقای زاخیلوال که گفتین استعفا کردن، خیر بلکه بسیار محکم شده و درست نیست.
I think we've got Rowena Mason from the Telegraph.
Yes.
Prime Minister, Mr. President, what is your message to President Assad and President Putin after the last 48 hours in Damascus? And Mr. Cameron, if I may, there's been a whole load of new allegations about G4S incompetence, the need for many more troops and its Olympic guards being arrested as illegal immigrants. Do you think the company should be taking millions of pounds in management fees in these circumstances?
First of all, on G4S, I made very clear yesterday, if a company doesn't fulfill its contract, then that company should be got after for that money. And that's exactly what's going to happen in the case of G4S. I think it's very important that we allow them to try and carry out the role that they are contracted to deliver. But of course, the government's interest, the interest of the Olympic Games, the interest of everyone in our country is to make sure that whatever it is necessary to do to deliver a safe and secure and successful Games is done. We've always had contingency plans in place to deliver just that, and we activate those contingency plans as and when necessary to deliver that. But as I couldn't be clearer, we will do what is necessary, and contracts that aren't fulfilled will have consequences, including pretty tough financial consequences. And I think G4S, in apologising for their performance, have already made clear that they realise that fact. In terms of Syria, I would have a very clear message for President Assad, which is it is time for him to go. It is time for transition in this regime. Clearly, Britain doesn't support violence on either side. But if there isn't transition, it's quite clear there is going to be civil war. That is the clear fact, I think, that we can all see on the ground. Now, the regime has done some truly dreadful things to its own people. And I don't think any regime that carries out acts as they have against their own citizens, and continue to do so, by the way, should survive. I think that regime should go. So the message to President Assad is it is time for transition, it is time for you to go. The message to President Putin, who I discussed this with at the G8 in Mexico, and the message to all those on the UN Security Council, it is time for the UN Security Council to pass clear and tough messages about sanctions, I believe under Chapter 7 of the UN, and to be unambiguous in this. Now, obviously, we are a UN Security Council with permanent members and permanent members that have vetoes. We can't pass these things without everybody stepping up to the plate and taking the right action. But I would appeal to those who in the past have held out against tough action against Syria, that, you know, what more evidence do we need about a regime that has brutalized its own people? And as I say, the alternative to political transition at the top of Syria is revolution from the bottom in Syria. And I think it is in everybody's interest, the Syrian people, the region, the wider world, the fight against terrorism. It is in everybody's interest that that transition takes place, and that political transition takes place quickly. The sooner that happens, the sooner the people of Syria can be freed from the tyranny under which they're currently suffering.
I think, Mr. Prime Minister, you have a meeting and we have to then prepare for the should be ended here. تشکر. ما باید جناب سرآزم باید برن به ملاقاتشان با امرای ربانی صاحب و باید زود ترتیبات سرآزم پاکستان بگیریم. باز دوباره میشیم. نیست امروز وقت نیست. تشکر.
I'm also giving an interview with your local television station.
Good.
So, thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Very nice to do this press conference.
It's very good. I like to go and ask